Are we live, Morma?
Yes.
So welcome everyone to our webinar today. What's in a name? The new JLI and SVRI Faith, Spirituality, Religion and Gender-Based Violence Hub, promoting the colonial knowledge. Today we will share with you the new approach of the Faith and GBV Hub and how we want to contribute to decolonizing knowledge in the field. I encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where are you based. But first, some housekeeping. Next slide, please. Thank you. We will be together for 60 minutes. The session is being recorded so you can watch it and share it afterwards. Webinar participants are muted, but please do introduce yourself in the chat and put questions in the Q&A box as well. Now, we are going to go to a quick introduction of the Leadership Council of the JLI SVRI Hub. And I'm going to start first with Dr. Lisa Leroux from Stellenbosch University. Over to you, Lisa. Quick introduction, where are you based, in which country, and your area of research?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Leroux. I am based in South Africa at Stellenbosch University, and I'm a research director at the Unit for Religion and Development Research. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. And over to you, Dr. Niek.
Greetings, everybody. I am talking from New York in the United States. I am a visiting scholar at the Vulnerability and Human Condition Initiative at Emory Law School, and I will be joining the Department of Ethnic Studies at University of Colorado at Boulder this fall as associate professor. I'm also a member of the GLI Leadership Council. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Niek. And over to you, Rafael. And remember to tell us a bit also about your research context. Rafael, over to you. Rafael, you're in mute.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Well, good morning or good afternoon. Buenos dias, buenas tardes, everyone. I'm currently in Brazil, but I'm based in Barcelona. I'm a postdoc fellow at the University of Barcelona at the Sociology of Religion Research Center. My field of expertise is on science and religion and SGBV in religious contexts. I worked in South Africa for 2 years with NGOs and organizations focusing on interventions with faith leaders. But now I'm based in, as I mentioned before, based in Barcelona, working in science and religion in contemporary world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rafael. And over to you, Sandra.
Thank you, Angelica. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandra Perteg. I'm based at the University of Birmingham, where I am a research fellow at the SVRI project looking at the sexual gender-based violence in forced migration settings. And my expertise is in research centers on the intersection on SGBV, religion, and displacement. I'm also a gender practitioner in international development and migration settings. It's a huge pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you so much, everyone. You were very quick in your introductions. And I just wanted to mention to the audience that we are missing 2 members today. And they couldn't join us at the last moment in the Leadership Council. And one of them is Prabhu Deepak from a tier fund. And the other person is Kirsten from the JLI. So hopefully they will come with us, but they had some problems connecting, but they're also members of the hub, as you can see them in the screen. And I just wanted to go back a bit quickly to Lisa to tell us a bit about her research focus and context here in South Africa and in the continent, but worldwide too.
Apologies, Angelica. I didn't realize I was going to have to introduce myself first, and I was a bit flustered. So Yes, so my research focuses around gender equality, violence against women and girls, and women empowerment within the context of religion and culture. And most of the research I do is within conflict-affected areas. So I've done research in, I think, 24 countries on 4 continents, working with and for government departments, intergovernmental agencies, FBOs, development networks, religious networks, churches, NGOs, and really just studying this, this complex dynamic of how gender, religion, and culture kind of interact and mutually influence. And I do a lot of work, almost all my work with practitioners and organizations, launching interventions and working in communities to address gender inequality and violence specifically. So yes, I hope that's a bit of a better explanation of my research focus.
Thank you, Lisa. And can I go also now to Rafael? Tell us a bit more about the focus of your research, Rafael.
So as I was mentioning before, I think that one of my main interests is to bridge academic research and applied research. And I mentioned 2 fields, basically science and religion, and then SGBV in faith context. And for me, although they might seem a bit unrelated, they are actually, there is a cross-fertilization between these 2 fields I see. When I'm, as I mentioned before, when I was working with interventions, evaluating interventions with religious leaders, I remember that there was always this clash between what is natural and what's unnatural when we're talking about gender and we're talking about gender roles. And some of them you'd use, for instance, scientific arguments to justify, for instance, religious views. And that for me was fascinating. And then I believe that we're going to talk more about it, how can you actually bridge different realities and different worldviews in the current world. So my main focus is trying to bridge precisely this multiverse universes and also bridge academic research and applied research.
Thanks, Rafael. Very interesting. And yeah, I know about your work in South Africa. And Dr. Nieg, if you can tell us a bit more about your research in the continent, would be great.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. My past research has really been on 2 issues. One, broadly defined as, development in Africa. But I'm mostly known for my contribution to the field of gender and queer studies in Africa. One thing I didn't mention when I was presenting myself is that as of 2022, I also became a matriarch. My country of birth is Cameroon, and I'm on the Basampo Bati, and that is an indigenous title. So as part of my future research and contribution, I am at the intersection of queer studies and womanism in understanding the role of spirituality, especially with an emphasis on not just Black women's experience, but the Black experience, I would say, drawing from mostly an indigenous perspective.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nieg. And Sandra, can you tell us a bit more about your particular area of research?
Yeah, sure. For the last 4 years, I've been researching intersectional and ecological approaches to understand the role of religion in experience of sexual gender-based violence or experience of violence against women and girls. So I'm looking at how religion shapes vulnerability to violence and how it shapes survivors' coping mechanisms. So I'm looking at the conservation of religious resources and religious coping methods. And now I'm embarking on a new journey, hopefully developing new methods, new tools to engage with religion in forced displacement, to tackle gender-based violence. And in future, I hope to develop, to look into the faith responses to mental health and sexual gender-based violence in displacement. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sandra. As you can see, our audience, very interesting areas of research of the Leadership Council members. And yeah, please do follow up, of course, you will see at the end of the of the webinar a link where you can join and see the work of the council members and the hub in general. So now we are going to move to a conversation with two members from the council. But first of all, I would like to invite the participants to answer the following question. And if moment we can put the slide in the screen. The question we are posing to you is, what does promoting the colonial knowledge in the field of GBV and faith mean to you? There is the question, and you can see that there is a link in the chat. There is a link where you can, it's a menti.com link, and you can go there and write what is that you think about this. And we will collect the answers, and we will show this at the end of the webinar. But now let me introduce you to the two speakers. We will have a conversation with them. There's no PowerPoint presentation, it's a conversation. And they're going to address key questions on what it means to decolonize knowledge in our field. Of course, Dr. Niek already introduced herself, and I'm going to address the first question to her. Dr. Niek, most research on faith, spiritualities, and gender-based violence has been conducted by researchers from the North, with a Eurocentric paradigm and focusing mostly on institutionalized religions. There is a growing interest and imperative to change the focus of the research and decolonized knowledge in our field. But what does this mean, and how can it be done?
Thank you. I think what decolonial research entails in the field of spirituality is a political project that seeks to restore that which has been central to indigenous identity and that which has been discarded or distorted by colonial and imperial domination and exploitation. It certainly means looking for ways to empower and work with localized indigenous knowledges and practices. A shift of paradigm so that culture and non-institutionalized spiritualities are recognized. And I would say given a seat at the table as knowledge producing. By indigenous here, I don't want to suggest that we can only approach the indigenous by opposition to something else. Let's say an indigenous is a non-Christian or a non-Muslim or a non-Hindu, etc. But I think what it deeply means is that we should be working towards, or at least simultaneously working towards retrieving that which has also been sidelined within the so-called dominant religion, that which has been turned away from spiritual enlightenment in service to serve power as domination only. So I think the goal of a decolonial project is a dream. As Martin Luther King once put it, it is a dream in which faith will be able to transform the juggling discords of our nations into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. But perhaps may I ask, following Martin Luther King, that we're talking here about research into spiritualities as a symphony of motherhood, of being, of queerhood, of boyhood, of girlhood, of singlehood, or of all that makes our embodied experience sacred a symphony of truth about all that is visible and invisible in spiritually sanctioned violence against women, against non-binary people. How can this be done? Well, one way is to just ensure that our operations, our speeches, our discourses, and our activism are decolonial sensitive and responsive. Now, more than change in the focus, I think we are really aiming to also change people. And to change people, we should stop asking what is wrong with them and perhaps start with different kind of questions. What happened to them? What happened to people when religion, when spiritualities embark on hegemonic, on a hegemonic course of domination rather than empowerment to bring about the dignity of all? So that would be just a few words to start the reflection on that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Niek. That's very interesting. And I like the notion of it's like a dream that we have to keep on dreaming, and we can have to keep on working around this decolonizing knowledge and power. So over to now, Rafael. Rafael, you have worked of course, in Latin America, you have worked in Africa, you have worked in now you are based in Europe. Can you provide some ideas or perhaps share some of your experiences regarding the colonial approach in research?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Angelica, and thank you, Dr. Naik, for starting with interesting concepts and ideas in this regard. I think I will take these two notions of the decolonial project as a political struggle, right, and the dream. I think that these are two interesting concepts, ideas to start with. The notion of how can we make this practice. But when you talk about practice, and we often when you talk about decolonial, I think that we often want to rush straight to changing existing methods and existing techniques without actually thinking about the roots of what's actually driving a colonial project or drove colonial projects or thoughts in research. And I think this is not to say that existing methodologies are not fit for this purpose, for the purpose of the decolonial project, but it means that we need to appreciate the benefits, as Dr. Naik mentioned before, and assets of local communities and indigenous communities. And based on that, reflect on how can we improve the existing limitations of methodologies, and at the same time articulate them with the local context. So it's more about the process of research design and implementation, but with critical perspective and considering the realities that we're dealing with. I'll give an anecdote of an experience that I had in South Africa, particularly, where I was evaluating this intervention with religious leaders. And by the end of it, I interviewed some of the religious leaders, and we were comparing this intervention specifically, which was about SGBV prevention. And we were talking about the trainers, and this faith leader in particular was mentioning how it was important to have a trainer, for instance, that had deep religious knowledge. So in this context, we had trainers who were actually open about their religious positions. They were also faith leaders, while others were not so open about that. And this takes us to the notion of positionality, which is also very present in this, let's say, decolonial project. So opening up about relational aspects of your identity as a researcher and connecting with people that are involved in the research. So in the sense, for instance, it was important and it made a difference for this intervention to have this agreement and this space shared between trainers who had deep religious knowledge and could speak the language of spirituality or diverse spiritualities in that context. But as I was mentioning before, it's a matter of implementation, but from start also. So establishing, for instance, spaces for discussing a research agenda with local researchers and representatives of the community that we're working with, it's very important. And many of the things that I'm going to say here may sound like a dream, as Dr. Nayak was saying. We obviously have to deal with funders and organizations in the global north, in the global south, south corporations. There are many variables here that can shape these relationships. But I think that this is about the dream, right? And opening up, establishing these spaces for discussing a research agenda, I think it's very important. Understand the local communities and local researchers and interact with different partners as all of us co-designers of research agendas and opening up opportunities for co-producing knowledge. I think that this is a key aspect from start to the end. And when I say to the end, for instance, I also mentioned another experience that I had in a research project in Togo, for instance, which was very productive. And it also shows how sometimes we're actually doing decolonial research without thinking about it. And that's the beauty of it. There is the project and there is a political project and there is a very important theoretical discussion about it and shifting powers in this regard. But there's also a lot of experiences that need to be documented in the global south that are already colonial. And in this case, in Togo, it was very interesting to actually, prior to writing a final report and sharing with the public the results of this research about SGBV, also in religious context in that country. I had to share the evidence I collected with faith leaders and with stakeholders, and they all gave inputs and challenged me and challenged the process of the research, and this made us to rethink a bit how we had actually to complement the evidence that we had found so far, and and adjust to was actually something more intersectional in a way, right? So we had inputs from women, from young women, from men, older, elderly, faith leaders, NGO practitioners. So this process of opening up the discussion of the preliminary results was very productive in that context. So it's, as I mentioned before, it was about actually instead of establishing a set way on the process of a research project, it's opening this black box and challenging the existing understandings of how we do research and how we position ourselves as researchers or researchee or object and those who are observing, shifting these positions of power. I don't know, Angelica?
Yeah, that's great. That's very interesting examples of how we really do research differently. And we will go back to you on that. But now going back to Dr. Nayak, the concept of pluriversality and interepistemic approaches have become more known and relevant in the field of unmasking and ending gender-based violence in the global south. Tell us more about these concepts. What do they entail? How can we also really live them and operationalize them?
Thank you, Angelica. Pluriversality is a holistic way of approaching and understanding the world. And simply put, we can think of it as an attitude or a method that reclaims our particular situatedness in order to reclaim the universal as a conversational or relational phenomenon, whereby the universal, we are called to celebrate what we are called to celebrate is really a process, the emergence of what I may call particular universals. Now, world history and politics can be seen as a scrambling for claims that ascribe ascendancy over the material world, people, culture, natural resources. This is the work of hegemony, the idea that both the secular and the spiritual claims must converge in asserting domination as a model of governance. So in pluriversality, we may recognize two particles, pluri meaning just many, and versality, the ability to adapt through the fluidity of our functions, our visions, our tasks, the tasks that we give ourselves as a people. The plural, or the celebration of many, of multitudes, in that we can recognize a conscious attempt to resist unidimensional perspectives on life in general and on human existence in particular. Now, world domination inspired by religious or political zeal has left us with scars in our souls and made us prisoners of the gods. A pluriversal approach to spirituality in its best rendition is a courageous call to untangle religion from politics, and by that I mean power as domination, in order to retrieve the best streams, the best models within all spiritual tradition that elevate human experience. And in the case that concerns us more particularly, a gendered experience that must dislodge violence as a necessary condition for asserting or practicing faith. Now, this resistance to toxic hierarchy and masculinity is what makes a pluriversal approach decolonial in essence, because here claims of universality in concept or application are neither imposed nor assumed. At best, universality emerges out of particular conversation between people and spiritual traditions. Now, for these conversations to take place, for a new inter-epistemic posture to be adopted or valued, we must do away with over-attribution of intent and capability, especially in the field of religion and spirituality. And by over-attribution here, I mean claims of a universe or universal that has been pre-domesticated within a particular tradition. So for me, I talked about a dream earlier. I talked about hope earlier. But before we can get there, or before we can be encouraged to leap forward, this decolonial work then entails that we recognize everybody, every tradition. That is step one. And step two is to look further inside those traditions, whether they are institutionalized or not, ways of bringing forth the best out of each. Because not doing that is a typical colonial attitude and method. So that is what I think, in my understanding, is the premise of a pluriversal approach and inter-epistemic conversations. And I think that for us in the research we wanted to advance, this is hopeful, both as a progressive work, but also as potentially also transformative of even that which has been institutionalized, that which has served the colonial project, calling it to task, calling it to reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nayek. And I can ask you a follow-up question on that. how can we support researchers in the South to really embrace these concepts and put them into practice when conducting research on violence against women and faith spirituality? And I like you've put a lot of emphasis on the spirituality aspect of the new discourse of the heart. So how we can really motivate them and basically strengthen their capacity to conduct research along these lines?
Yes, I tend to distinguish spirituality and religion. I want to think that first, spirituality is the true universal everywhere, worldly. Actually, I'm not going to use universal, but it's a worldly phenomenon. Now, how can we encourage researchers in the South to embrace the concept is the question. I want to submit that I consider myself, although situated in North America, as somebody from the South. And one of the things that happen in academia, or the more you climb up the ladder, is that less and less you see yourself. More and more you are encouraged to embrace the concept, but not the experience itself. I think one of the things that we are trying to say and do as a decolonial project here is that we value experience. We want to hold on the one hand the concept, and it doesn't matter whether it comes from Latin America or Palestine or anywhere else, human experience is the gel, is the inner core on which we can build together. Because as I said, this is not a separatist type of concept. It is just to say that we have to recognize the power dynamic. So, and I think that researchers in the South already live the experience. They already know what it means to teach crazy hours and not have 1 minute for research. They already embody that. So for them, I would say it's not an embrace of a concept as much as it is the call to them is to say, bring forth yourself. Bring forth yourself as you are, and let us appreciate you as you stand within academia, because that is what we are missing today in this kind of hegemonic trajectory we are embarked on when we say we are producing knowledge. Thank you.
Very much, Dr. Nayak. That's great. And I think that leads me to a question for Rafael, also very much linked to partners who we were with. I think we're posing now really ethical questions here. So Rafael, what is the implication of a decolonial approach in research for stakeholders and partners' work ethics?
It's interesting what Dr. Nayak is mentioning, because also me departing from a similar experience with being Brazilian and having worked in Europe but also in Africa. So this triangle has made me think a lot about how we actually establish, sometimes formally or institutionalize these relationships and the notion of work ethics. And I will start with this, for instance, on asking the audience to reflect on their memorandums or understandings in terms of references that we sign often. I mean, if you actually stop to read and think about what's stated there, and when we think about how to make these projects and this struggle and this dream practical, there's this word that is very trendy right now, right? The appropriation. So this serves in both ways. So sometimes I think that taking the colonial ways of establishing its power in academia or research, for instance, and shifting it and making sure that our interests are also projected there, I think that this could be a good start. For instance, making it clear in these relationships, in these memorandums, in terms of references, these aspects that we've been mentioning here. This is not just theory, this is not just thought. Recognizing the assets of the community, recognizing the assets of the local knowledge. This should be stated from start in these discussions that I mentioned before. The opening up these spaces is not just this space, it's not just the discussion, but it's also how can we project this and document this, making for instance, partners aware of a balanced pay scale between locals and non-locals, and non-local researchers and partners, for instance, and also acknowledging the role of religion among researchers. This is not just something that we do out of the formalities, but also within the structure of designing a research. I think that aspects as such, and also acknowledging also the importance of making these spaces, the spaces that I've mentioned before, actually formal spaces. What I mean with that is that when establishing these terms of references, making sure that there will be follow-ups with non-locals and local researchers, and then, for instance, the anecdotes of the discussion of preliminary results of a research, this should be included in these terms of references. This shouldn't be just an idea that came up as a last resource. For me, there's also this idea that, for instance, South-South cooperation in itself is also decolonial by definition. And I sometimes disagree with this, because this colonial project and the colonial thinking, it's very powerful, and we all know that. And I often see how under the notion of the colonial, we establish South-South cooperations, but actually the discussions and the critical thinking on how the research has been doing is not being also discussed among these partners. It's not just about, for instance, having partners from Brazil and South Africa, but it's just actually talking about how this research will be implemented, because in these relationships we have other nodes of or imbalances of power. One of these, for instance, is language. We often talk about it, right? How knowledge is produced and which languages knowledge is produced, and all these aspects being clearly stated and from start acknowledged by all partners. I think it's very important. And one last aspect regarding work ethics, it's also about who gets credit for the knowledge produced, right? There is this strong imbalance of power between institutions, academic institutions from the north, from the south, and in relation to that also local organizations or international organizations. How can we actually think about the outputs of any research project, and who's going to be part of those who are credited for the outputs, for this knowledge produced? What are the names that appear there, and in which languages this dissemination, this communication of results goes through? So I think that all these aspects should also jump from discussions and go into institutionalization and clear statements of in research design.
Thank you very much, Rafael. I think it's so important what you have mentioned, the issue of what happens with the research we conduct, who gets to know first about the result of this research, and really how it can be really implementable research, really useful. So I share in the chat for the audience too a guide that was produced by SVRI in Raising Voices last year on how to establish ethical, respectful research partnership between organizations and researchers. So there is the resource. So last words, Dr. Niek, before we move on to our next section, if anything you want to add?
Anything I want to ask?
Want to add or ask Rafael?
Oh,
yeah,
add. Maybe I want to add. I just want to share my excitement, when we put those two words, religion or spirituality and gender-based violence. One of the things, as a political scientist, I am an institutionalist. But one of the things I really find exciting when you enter the field of religion is that it is a bit humbling, because it reminds us that we are not finite product. Somewhere there in the horizon of the self lies some kind of mystery. And we're invited to enter and explore and be surprised in a way that really restores and builds dignity. So here, when we are juxtaposing religion, spirituality, and violence or gender-based violence, there's something that is fundamentally off. because it suggests that somehow there is no horizon, right? And there is no surprise. There is no mystery. We know it all, and we have to fix certain bodies in certain ways and choose this trajectory. So for me, I am just excited about this project and about this hub. And my last word is that, you know, I'm inviting the attendees and ourselves to continue in this élan, if you want to say it in French, and remember that this is a call to a most radical and unconventional work that is needed. Especially, I want to speak perhaps about Africa. There is a lot of hope. There is a lot of despair also. And more so, we see the state not responding to the needs of the people. I'm not suggesting religion will do, but there is something to be said about being able to speak to the human in his wholeness. And I think that is the premise of religion. That is the premise of religion when it tells us whatever you see is important, but how about you step into something you actually don't know and discover yourself? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's very, very inspiring, Dr. Nayek, and definitely a very ambitious project for the hub. And with this, I will thank you very much, Rafael, Dr. Nayek, for these very insightful thoughts, provocative thoughts, and really, that's at the core of the hub, what we want to do. So I will hand over to now Sandra Perteg, who will introduce us to exactly the research objectives, what we want to do with these hubs. Over to you, Sandra. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Angelica. Well, upon hearing these wonderful interventions from my colleagues, let's just go through our operational objectives. So I'll be just talking about what the hub set out to achieve in the next 3 years. And I'll begin from our objectives. So in order to advance the efforts to decolonize knowledge, we set out, first of all, to promote and support the exploration of innovative and mixed method research. This is next slide. And also looking at this interdisciplinary techniques, all in order to strengthen and improve the existing evidence base and inform and improve practices that engage with faith, spirituality, and religion in lived experiences of people. We hope that this will reach out, this research will reach out to communities, to researchers in different settings, as well as institutional donors and mainstream NGOs to encourage them to engage with religion in SGBV research. And this will be done by facilitating this kind of knowledge transfer and dissemination of research among faith-based, spiritual, and secular actors. The second aim that we set out, the objective, is to support the production of policy-oriented research from joint initiatives supported by local communities, funding partners, and researchers, in order to inform culturally sensitive and informed decolonial programs. In doing so, we hope that we will promote research that recognizes the historical and ongoing effects of Eurocentrism on cultural and religious imagination of gender relations from a decolonial perspective. And we also mean by decolonizing knowledge is to identify and advance a research agenda on the key gaps in knowledge and practice, where the vital voices of practitioners, activists, and researchers from low and middle income countries are heard. The third aim is to support research conducted in low and middle income countries and support the research that is led by institutions and researchers based in those settings through promoting networking. Now I will go to the next slide. So these are broadly 3 objectives, quite specific, and I will just now talk briefly about activities that we planned out. So here's just a summary on the slide what we are planning to do. So in the first year, we have been already refreshing the hub's framework that you have been listening to about, and we are also planning in this year to continue podcasts and webinars that we already started. There will be also an awareness session during the SVRI forum in 2022, this September, about the hub and existing evidence on SGBV, on GBV, gender-based violence, faith, spirituality, and religion. In the second year, we start to build a little bit more. So we are planning to, first of all, develop, launch, and run a small grant and mentorship program for early career low and middle income countries researchers. We hope to launch quite an exciting project. We defined to develop a scale, to validation scale, kind of a measurement to be able to identify the link between GBV, faith, spirituality, and religion. This may include the development of standardized indicators, questions, and measurements on this phenomenon, the relationship between religion, faith, spirituality, and gender-based violence. So we called it for now tentatively as the validation of religion and violence against women and girls scale, but that's a very tentative title. And for that, we of course need to try to fundraise for a series of engagements around meal, monitoring, evaluation, a learning framework for religion and GBV, to develop an adequate framework and to help us pilot this framework in different settings. We hope to achieve this development through a participatory process where we would like to involve collaborations between academics, researchers, and practitioners. And we also plan to, in the second year, to host online capacity workshop to facilitate research uptake of findings and existing knowledge for researchers from low and middle income countries who work on this in this area on GBV, faith, and spiritualities. And we will continue with podcasts and webinars. And in the last year, just quickly, we hope to run the second year of the small grants and mentorship program for early career researchers. And we hope to test the scale that we developed in the second year. That will be done in partnership with partners in different settings. And we hope to present the results of the small grant research projects at SVRI Forum in 2024. And finally, we will continue disseminating the research projects findings, the ones from the small grants and that will be done through webinars and journal publications. I think that's a very brief overview of our activities for the next 3 years. In the next slide, you can just find details to contact us. We encourage you to work with us, be in touch with us, and learn and grow to discover ourselves, as Dr. Nalik said. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Thanks for that. So this is our very, not so ambitious, but I think, yeah, it's a big project, so it goes slowly because we want to go far, I think. And I'm going to hand over to Lisa now to discuss some questions, if our comments from the audience, and I'll close the webinar. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Angelica. Thank you, Sandra, for the overview of our objectives and aims for the coming 3 years. Before we move over to Q&A session, Morma, I'm going to ask you if you can show the word cloud. So when we started, we posted the question in one word: what does promoting decolonial knowledge in the field of GBV and faith mean to you? And everyone was asked to click on that Mentimeter link and just add their words. And we're busy seeing what we got there. I'm seeing this for the first time as well, so patience as I also read. I think a big thing that I'm seeing here is these two sides around kind of making the circle bigger is the one, like inclusion, understanding, solidarity, agency, respect. So that kind of this approach around decolonial knowledge, really promoting better understanding and inclusion of everyone. But at the same time, we're also seeing that words like confrontation, difficult, disrupt, process, confrontation. I think I already maybe said confrontation, but highlighting that while it's easy to talk about this, this is a road that's not always easy to walk. So you will come up against obstacles, but I am encouraged by I think especially what struck me here is the word solidarity, and I'm glad to see that it resonates in that kind of way with you and with all of us. Now, before let's move into the Q&A, but I'm going to ask if you can leave this up a little bit longer, Morma, that we can all just kind of take, or not, just take a look at it for a bit longer. We're going to move into Q&A. People, you can still post questions in the chat box, or I see one new message was added. And if everyone can please put on their videos, because I'll be directing to different people. So Rafa, you're going to be put on the spot first. And I'm just going to read you from the side. So something that we've been seeing in what I will call the religion and GBV space, just in short, something that we've been seeing as emerging really controversial and a very topical issue within international development is this issue around religion and religious communities and their response to LGBTI people and LGBTIQ rights. And this isn't just a sub-Saharan African issue. I mean, we really see this in spaces, global North and global South. And if I'm adding my own 2 cents, I'm engaging with many practitioners and development practitioners that are really struggling to navigate this space around how to engage with religious leaders and communities, and what is often a complete dismissal of the issue and of the rights and of the humanity of this community, of this group. What are your thoughts on this, and where you think our work as researchers, our work as practitioners can be moving in responding to this massively big question that's being posed to you, but I'd be very happy to hear your thoughts, especially considering the many different spaces that you've been working. Please, Rafa.
Thanks, Lisa. Well, it's massively difficult, but it's also massively important. So I really appreciate that you bring this up. I think that and one of the important aspects of talking in listening in qualitative research, which is mainly my field of work, is that we actually uncover many things that sometimes the pre and posts, right? The pre and post evaluations they sometimes miss. And you know that I'm always advocate for that. And it's interesting. It was interesting, for instance, to hear from many of the religious leaders, for instance, that had been through interventions, that the main issue with LGBTIQ plus aspects were the fact that they didn't know much about this, about what this means, about this. It's almost like a black box, right? I often use this metaphor of a black box, and that's what entails to be gay or lesbian, or what is trans, what is gender, what is sex, what is sexuality in the context of in its diversity. And I think that based on that, also it's important to and we talked about this before, to know where we are basing our efforts or putting our efforts on. And we have, in its diversity, we also have many faith leaders who are actually very open and proactive in engaging LGBTIQ plus communities. And sometimes they also struggle with visibility in this regard, and they also complain about not being able to visibilize their work, often because of peer pressure, and being afraid of being challenged by other faith leaders. But I think that this work of identifying also this diversity within religious perspectives, it's very important, in documenting them precisely because they're not visibilized. there is, it's clear that there are problems and difficulties in trying to engage with certain issues regarding LGBTIQ plus communities in religion. But it's also true that there are a lot of work being done in progressive views regarding these communities in Brazil and in South Africa or elsewhere that is not being documented and not being shared. And they also need the support of organizations and researchers to help embarking in this project of visibilizing and projecting the work that is being done. But yeah, on the one side, I would say that make sure that we, let's say, explore the cracks that already open and the doors that are already open in this field. And on the other hand, people will be very surprised on how open to discuss and to understand and also to add perspectives, spiritual perspectives, religious perspectives to sexual and gender diversity.
Thank you so much, Rafa. And I'm using my platform to say I really think we need to talk more about this and have more discussions, because it's really a driving issue. I think especially in countries where legislation is also limiting the rights of LGBTIQ plus people. So thank you so much for that. We have time for one more question. And before I move to it, I just want to highlight what Val posted. She has 2 words for this question: human experience and interfaith engagement. Thanks, Val. Dr. Nayak, I want to ask you a quick question, and it's with a word that you said right when you started. And you spoke about the need to restore what has been dismissed and ignored and buried. And I think this word restore really struck me, because I think often in the narrative or the talking about decolonial movements, it's like it's this new thing, you know, like it's totally new, it's been designed, we're now finally seeing this. Whereas this is what you've been so eloquently describing. It's always been there. It's just been dismissed and ignored and buried. But if you can maybe, and we have 2 minutes, but just tell us a bit more about what you think such a process of restoration could look like. It's still there.
I was muted. Yes, I really want to share here the quote that from Martin Luther King. That is to say, on the one hand, we are at a time in history where identity matters, and all of this really matters, right? But identity for which sake? Where are we going with this? The challenge and the most fascinating aspect of being at the margin and struggling for justice is that to do it well, you cannot imagine liberation as the thing that belongs to you only. You're liberating, fighting for your own liberation, but you must believe in the other, including the person who is oppressing you. So it can never be a one-way street. And that really is only makes sense through the teachings that we have received through so many diverse spiritual and religious traditions, because politics doesn't give that to you. So restoration here means different things. Let me maybe simply put is that we begin by the fact with the truth, some people will say, or the assertion that we all share into something that is profoundly spiritual, that is profoundly sacred, but that to live in this conventional world and organization, every now and then we are faced with very difficult decisions, and we compromise, and we fall short, and we go crazy, but that in of itself is always a constant. And the word religion is to bring together, to bind, to reconnect. So religion and spirituality is that reminder to remember something, that time, that us, that self, that is unbounded, that belongs to you and to me, that belongs to the universe out of conversations, not the one that is imposed from top down. So that restoration, I think, is, I'm using that religious language or spiritual image to say, this is the beauty. We're not just studying spirituality or religion as a subject of inquiry, which is what we do as social scientists, but we are also entering into the conversation with that kind of body of knowledge to explore how it speaks to us so that we can become the transformation we seek to see in the world. So that is the me, the outsider, the alien, the other, the colonizer, and the colonized combined. Only in that perspective can we talk about restoration, because the end goal is to create a better world for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naik. And I think that's kind of the sentence that you want to end a webinar on. Thank you everyone for contributing. Thank you everyone for joining. I really want to encourage you, if you're not already part of the Hub, a registered member, please sign up. Morma or Angelica will post in the chat box how you can subscribe to the Hub. There's a link and you can sign up and you'll receive the emails and invites. So please join that way. Also, please engage with us. You know, we've kind of set out this 3-year plan, but we'd love your input on it. Also, really to think around how to operationalize it. And if you have inputs to give, we'd love it if you give it. Also, at SVRI Forum in Mexico in September, we will have a meeting there. That will be open to anyone and everyone. You don't have to be a member of the Hub, but if you're there, please come. It'll be great to see you and just to take these discussions further. But we will be sharing more information on the forum events and when and where it will be. And then I want to, just before we close, thank Morma for organizing all of the tech stuff. And just arranging all of it so well, and Angelica for keeping us all in line. And thank you everyone. We're 3 minutes over time, but thank you so much for joining this webinar, and we hope we'll see you again with the upcoming ones. Thank you everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye. Have a good day, good evening.